Hey, 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 it's AAA Wednesday, which stands for Ask Alyssa Anything. It's my weekly Q&A session where I'm responding to all your questions, concerns, thoughts about writing, publishing, editing, revising, and everything in between. Just 2 pieces of housekeeping before we dive in. I'll keep it short and sweet. Number 1, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. In addition to these Q&As, I also do deep dives into the publishing industry and specific aspects of how to improve your manuscript. So if that interests you, we would love to have you. Second, for my returning subscribers, you know what to do. If you can just scroll down and give me a thumbs up, it's a small thing, but really helps out my channel. Thank you so much. Let's dive into the first question today. If you can't decide between 2 different endings, can you query a novel with both? If so, what if the different ending changes the genre? For novels, agents want you to query a complete draft, which means that you're going to have to settle on one ending and stick with it for the time being. That said, agents do understand that this is still a draft and it's very much a work in progress. If they love everything about your book except the ending, then they might bring that up to you when they discuss representation and say, I really loved your book, but have you considered a different ending? I would maybe consider this possibility, and you can talk about that editorial change. So for now, go ahead and pick the ending that you think resonates most strongly with your intentions and vision for the book, but you can certainly remain open-minded if down the line you and your agent or you and your editor at the publishing house decide that you want to tweak it. You can always raise those concerns to them as you're going through the developmental editing process as well. Here's the next question. What's the difference between speculative fiction versus contemporary fiction? Speculative fiction is an umbrella term that indicates that the story does not take place in our exact real world as we know it. You could have a fantastical setting, and that is technically speculative fiction. You could also have a sci-fi setting, and that is technically speculative fiction. When we see speculative as a genre standing in and of itself, that is, it's not stated to be sci-fi or fantasy, usually that means that it is similar to our own world with some type of speculative element introduced and layered on top of it. Contemporary fiction, on the other hand, takes place in our real contemporary society as we know it today. There isn't anything fantastical or magical going on in the setting. It plays by all the same rules that our world and society does. You could have a speculative novel that takes our real world and adds a fantastical, magical, or sci-fi element on top of it. But with speculative fiction, we understand that we are not playing by the same rules that our real world plays by. Here's the next question. I have a female villain who was supposed to die in my original draft, but after writing her somewhat sympathetic backstory, I became reluctant to kill her off. I'm considering writing a second book devoted solely to her redemption story. My question is, how do I ensure her survival? How do I get her out of this first book in one piece without it feeling forced or overly convenient? Your villain does not necessarily have to die at the end of your story for the reader to feel a sense of finality, closure, and resolution. If you want to keep the door open for whatever reason, whether that is to introduce a looming threat that you'll pick up on in the next book, or just because you don't want to kill off the villain, there are ways to close the door on the threat, so to speak, without actually killing them off. For instance, one example would be to ship them off in some way to another part of the world where they are no longer a threat on the main character. This way, the reader will understand that they're not dead, but they aren't going to be threatening our character in the same way that they have been. Or they could be jailed, for instance, and that would give the same effect. Another route you could go would be to leave it a bit open-ended on whether they died or not, having that occur off stage. The Hulu series Shogun just did this, where we thought the character was probably dead, but we didn't know for sure. And then you can pick up in the next book and reveal that they weren't actually dead all along. This technique can be a bit overdone or cheesy to the reader, so I would use it with caution, but it is an option. If you're enjoying my Q&A sessions, I have so much more content available for you on my newsletter website, chapter-break.com. I really encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. You'll not only hear my tips, but also from literary agents and best-selling authors. They're giving some amazing advice. If you sign up, you will get all of that delivered straight to your inbox on a weekly basis. And as a bonus, you will get my free story self-assessment worksheet, which is a resource I designed to help you look at your story from a new lens and see how you can tactically improve it on the next draft. The links to download your free story self-assessment and check out Chapter Break are in the description. Here's the final question today. I have an unrelated question regarding comp titles. I have watched your videos and others on the topic, and know how important these are when querying. Problem is, I cannot find anything remotely resembling my memoir. A young couple, my husband and I, leave a suburban life behind in South Africa and move into a remote part of Namibia to do missionary work. Although the story is faith-based, it's not preachy, more about surviving the trials of carving out a home, coping with a different culture, animal adventures, personality clashes, injustice within the congregation, losing my husband and other family members, but sticking it out in the bush for 30+ years. African travel stories abound, but without my motivation. Religious stories are mostly about escaping abuse of a fundamentalist childhood, nothing positive like mine. Can I say all of this in my query instead of using comps that don't fit? Know that no comp title is going to necessarily be a perfect fit, and that's fine. Agents understand that, and they're not meant to be perfect fits. That's why I like to use the X meets Y approach. Ideally, you will find comps that share some aspect of your story, even if they are wildly different from your story in other aspects. The agent will understand that when you put those two stories together, it makes something like your book. I also like to encourage authors to explain what specific elements of the comp title aligns with theirs, or you can use that space to clarify what about that title is different from yours, or how you have a different spin on the same subject or theme. So in your case, maybe you comp to another memoir set in Africa, but you explain how your motivation is different from the motivation of that character. And then you comp to another book not set in Africa, but has a similar protagonist's journey, and you say that your journey is similar to that book, but the setting is different. The agent will understand which aspects you're pulling from each of those comp titles and be able to see how your story is somewhat like both of them, without any necessarily needing to be a perfect match. That's all we had time for today. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you have a question, drop it in the comments here and it will be added to my queue for my next session. Before you head out, don't forget your free story self-assessment worksheet and my newsletter. Those links are in the description. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss out on my next video, and give me a thumbs up if you want me to keep doing these sessions. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing.